Hello everyone, Darren from DrayTek Australia and New Zealand. After the initial installation of your router, you'll need to occasionally check that it's running the latest firmware and make sure that everything is working correctly. In today's webinar, we'll look at maintenance tasks to help you better manage your DrayTek router and to monitor the health of your network. We'll focus on the system maintenance menu in DrayTek routers and go through the various options and also check out some external tools available. We'll start out with some background information, including how to get started, and a look at the DrayTek graphical user interface, including the system maintenance menu. Then we'll go through how to upgrade firmware. We'll wrap up with a quick look at DrayTek's software-based management platforms and how they can help with these tasks. Okay, let's start with some basic background information to kick things off. First, be aware that the factory default settings vary by device and model. Most DrayTek routers have a default LAN IP of 192.168.1.1, while access points have the LAN IP address of 192.168.1.2, and Vigor switches usually have a default LAN IP of 192.168.1.224. However, this can sometimes vary, so always check out the Quick Start guide before you do anything else. To access a router's GUI, simply connect your PC to one of the LAN ports as shown in this diagram. Then, using your browser, punch in the router's default IP address into the address field and you should see the login menu appear. If that doesn't happen, check that your PC's Ethernet IPv4 settings are set to automatic or DHCP and reset the router by inserting a pointed object into the reset hole on the front or back and hold the button down for a few seconds. Then power it off and on, then try again. One thing that is constant is the default username and password. Those are always admin and admin. Another way to configure the router is by using the command line interface or CLI. You might need to do this for diagnostic purposes or to configure settings which are not available through the web interface. There are two methods to access it, via Telnet from a command prompt or using the web console available in the router GUI. When using Telnet on your PC, simply connect to the router LAN port and ensure that the Ethernet TCP IPv4 settings are set to obtain an IP address automatically in older Windows devices or automatic DHCP in Windows 11. Alternatively, you can enter a static IP address if you know what you're doing. Then, from the command prompt, run the command telnet 192.168.1.1 or whatever the router LAN IP address is. Once connected, log in with the admin username and password, which is admin and admin if the router is at factory default settings. When you're in the router CLI, you can enter a question mark to see the available commands. You can then go up a layer by entering one of those commands followed by a question mark. That will display the valid subcommands for that command. Next, entering the full command, that is a command with a subcommand followed by a question mark, will display the current setting. To change a setting, you just need to enter the command with a parameter after it. The second method is to use the shortcut in the router web interface. Clicking on the web console shortcut at the top of the page will take you to the router CLI. This is handy if you don't have a Telnet client on your PC. Again, log in with the router admin username and password. There's a complete list of CLI commands available in the Telnet section of the user guide or in our knowledge base. I'll include a link to that in the description below. Okay, back to the web user interface, which is how most of us will configure a router. The first thing you'll notice after logging into the router is the dashboard page. DrayTek have designed their dashboard to be more interactive and user-friendly. With the visual display on the router on this page, you can not only know about used and unused ports, but if you click on any of the ports, you'll be directed to its configuration page. There are other options such as system information, IPv4 LAN information, IPv4 internet access, interface, security, system resource, and quick access. All of these make it easy to go through the settings under one page instead of checking them through multiple options. The dashboard can also be customized to only display the items you're interested in. So at the top of the web page, you'll notice that there are several useful icons which are shortcuts to various functions. We have Home, GUI Map, Web Console, Configuration Backup, User Manual, and Logout icons. More details of these shortcuts is available in a video we produced a few years ago at the link shown here. It's called 6 Hidden Features in the DrayTek Vigor Router Dashboard. The features aren't really hidden, but they're easy to miss if you don't know they're there. Moving on to the System Maintenance menu in DrayTek devices, this is where you can find several management functions. Here are the menu options available under the System Maintenance menu in a Vigor 2865 router. Most of these functions will be available in other DrayOS routers. DrayTek access points and Vigor switches also have some of these options. Let's go over each of these options using the Vigor 2865 router in our example. At the top we have System Status. This page provides information such as router model, firmware version and its build date. You also get a summary of the LAN and WAN details. Next on the list is TR069. This is used to set up the router so it can be managed by VigorACS 2 or VigorACS 3. In DrayTek access points and Vigor switches, this setting can also be used with VigorConnect to manage these devices. I'll talk about these solutions later. Next one down, NetFlow. This is a new option added in firmware version 4.4.0 and above in the Vigor 2865 router. It will not be available in older routers or older firmware. It provides the ability to collect IP network traffic as it enters or exits an interface. By analysing the data provided by NetFlow, a network administrator can determine things such as the source and destination of traffic and the class of service. Next on the list we have the administrator password settings. Here you can change the admin password and also select a more secure method to log into the router by using either one-time password or two-factor authentication. A user in the local database can also be assigned as an administrator as well. Secure login method can also be selected here. In addition to the administrator password, we have the option for a user password. This is where you want someone to monitor the router and only be permitted to make basic configuration changes. In the login page greeting menu, you can create a custom login page when logging into the router. In the example shown here, we've entered the company name Ilan Technology on the page, and at the bottom we can have a custom welcome message. There's also an option to upload your own file for the login page, so you can add your own logo or anything you like. The configuration backup option allows you to backup and restore saved configuration files to the router. It's recommended to regularly save a copy of the router configuration in case it becomes damaged. There's an option to have automated regular backups by saving the backups to an attached USB flash drive. A handy feature if you forget the admin password of the router is to restore the router configuration without the admin password. For this to work, the backed up configuration file must come from the same router, and you'll need to reset the router to factory defaults so that you can access the router login page using the default admin credentials. It's worth noting that some router menu settings can also be backed up within the menu. This includes static route setup, port redirection, open port setup, firewall, object settings, and VPN profiles. So, why bother making a configuration backup? Well, there are three main reasons why you should do this. Firstly, if something goes wrong in the router or device, you can always restore a known working version to get the device working again. Next, you can copy it to another device if needed. The third reason, if you end up in a pickle and need assistance, is that DrayTek support will often ask for a copy of the configuration file to check the settings used and try to duplicate the issue reported so a solution can be found. If you're upgrading from an older router to the latest model, you can migrate the configuration settings, provided the routers are of a similar type. For example, with the Vigor 2865 router, you can import the configuration file from the Vigor 2860 or 2862, provided they have firmware versions listed at the bottom of this menu page as shown here. Webhook is a new feature that has been added. It allows the Vigor router to send periodical reports, that is, webhook messages, to a monitoring server. The information sent includes the router model, MAC address, uptime, memory and CPU usage, and WAN status. Here we have a sample of the type of output you can see using Webhook. In the router, it's just a matter of enabling this function and specifying the server URL to receive the reports. Syslog mail alert. When issues are encountered in the router, it's often necessary to capture the syslog for troubleshooting. The syslogs can be sent to an external syslog server or to an attached USB flash drive. You can also select the types of syslogs to capture. Syslogs can also be viewed in the Diagnostics Syslog Explorer menu, but the number of syslogs is limited. There's also an option there to save the syslog to an attached USB disk, similar to the System Maintenance menu here. Next setting, time and date. It's important to have the correct time and date setting in the router. This is required for setting up scheduled tasks such as internet access time slots, firewall settings to apply at allocated times, and enabling Wi-Fi access for users. Syslogs also include a timestamp, so it helps to have the correct time when analysing the logs. Certificate generation also requires the correct time and date to work, and WAN budget settings also requires the correct time and date, so it'll match your monthly internet data plan. There's an option here to use your PC browser time, but a more reliable method is to use NTP, which points to a time server and updates on a regular basis. You'll also need to ensure that the correct time zone is selected, or you'll see unexpected results for scheduled tasks. SNMP, this is an easy way to monitor router uptime as well as other various parameters. SNMP Agents version 1, 2 and 3 is supported in the latest router firmware. Free SNMP server software such as PRTG can be used to monitor the router. You'll also need to enable the SNMP service in the System Maintenance Management menu. This diagram illustrates the principle of SNMP communication. The agent, which will be the DrayTek router, will send traps to the SNMP management station when an event occurs. We also have GET and SET requests. DrayTek Vigor routers support MIB2 and ADSL line MIBs. DrayTek have provided a list of OIDs that are supported in the latest firmware and covers several categories listed here. The list is available in Knowledge Base Article 5517, which I'll link to in the description below. The OID is in numerical dot format. One example shown here is 1.3.6.1.2.1.1.1, which is for system description. This has to be entered in the network management station so that it can poll the router to retrieve this data. The management menu page is where you can control access to the router from both the internet and the local network. Here you can give the router a name and disable the auto logout function. Enabling the validation code provides an extra level of security from hackers trying to gain access to the router. If internet access is enabled, it's recommended to also create an access list to only permit access from a known source. A more secure method to access the router remotely is to disable internet access and provide access via a VPN connection. Management ports can also be customized. Brute force protection will block multiple attempts at trying to log into the router. And LAN access setup can also be customized to allow access to the router from certain LANs. A new addition in later firmware versions is panel control. This allows you to customize the appearance and function in the front panel of the router. Here the LED indicators, push buttons, USB port and LAN ports can be enabled or disabled. Here you can see that LEDs can also have a sleep mode where they will turn off automatically after a set time. Sometimes we have customers who don't want flashing LEDs in their environment, and this helps them. 3 other panel controls are available. The button control allows you to disable the wireless and factory reset buttons. Disabling the wireless button prevents the Wi-Fi from being disabled if the button is accidentally pressed. Disabling the USB port will prevent people from using that. Similarly, LAN ports can be disabled to prevent unauthorized users from connecting a device into an unused LAN port. Next, we have self-signed certificates, which are a unique identification for your device. The Vigor router generates the certificates by itself to ensure security. The self-signed certificate is signed with its own private key. These can be used for services such as SSL, VPNs and HTTPS. In addition, it can be created for free by using a wide variety of tools. Clicking on Regenerate will recreate the certificate. As mentioned earlier, you'll need to ensure the time and date, including the time zone, are correctly set up for this function. The Reboot System menu option allows you to restart the router. You can also set regular restarts according to a time schedule. This may be necessary if some issues are encountered that require a regular reboot. It can be restarted to use the current configuration or to reset to factory default settings. It's important to remember, and I can't stress this enough, if you're restarting the router remotely using the factory default option, it'll mean a trip to the remote site to reconfigure the device since you'll lose connection with it as soon as it reboots. That's because the settings you are using to access the router remotely will be gone. The Firmware Upgrade menu allows you to install the latest firmware version. There are other methods that can be used to upgrade router firmware, and I'll talk about this more shortly. For this one, you'll notice a button called Check the Latest Firmware. Clicking that will check the DrayTek website to see if a later version is available for download. You can also install an older firmware version if you wish to go back to a previous version. It's recommended to first make a backup of the router config before upgrading the firmware, since sometimes if the gap in version numbers is too large, the existing configuration may not fully migrate, especially if many new features have been added to the latest version. Another point to note is that when you download the firmware, the zip file will contain two files, a .all and a .rst file. The .all will retain the current router configuration, while the .rst will reset the router to factory default settings. This is sometimes necessary when the router configuration has become corrupted and the router is not working as expected. Firmware Backup is a new feature added to later model routers and firmware to create a backup of the firmware. This is used by the router to restore router functionality should the running firmware become corrupted, causing the router to crash. After the third crash, the router will automatically reinstall the backed up firmware. There are three options to create a backup of the firmware. These are after a router reboot, after a specified period of time that the router has been running without issues, or create the backup manually. The internal service user list menu allows you to enable or disable radius and local 802.1x settings for users created in the user management section of the router. And the last item in the system maintenance menu is dashboard control. This lets you select which items to display in the dashboard of the router. If you've disabled features on the dashboard and you want to get them back, this is where you come to do that. With all the dashboard control options enabled, you'll see a dashboard similar to this one. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to the option in system maintenance to upgrade firmware, there are several other methods that can be used. But firstly, you might ask, why do I need to upgrade the router firmware anyway? Well, there are three reasons. These are to get all the new features, to get the latest bug fixes, and all firmware development is based on the latest version. To check which firmware is currently installed in the router, go to the dashboard page and you'll find it in the system information section. So the various methods available to upgrade router firmware are using the Web GUI option in system maintenance menu, which we've already covered. Next, using the firmware upgrade utility. Using FTP for remote firmware installation. This option is now obsolete but is still an option in some older model routers. Forced TFTP mode for routers that have become unresponsive, and using the VigorACS central management system. One bonus with VigorACS 2 or ACS 3 is that firmware upgrades can be scheduled to be done automatically after hours. For each of these methods, it's recommended to first make a backup of the router configuration before upgrading the firmware. This won't be possible for method 4 where the router is unresponsive, but hopefully you'll have a previous backup you can use to restore the router configuration afterwards. If you need more information about any of these methods, there's an application note which I'll link to in the description below. There's also a video available which I'll link to below as well. That goes through all of the methods mentioned, including the procedure to recover a bricked router if you ever find yourself in that situation. The final topic we'll look at today is software-based management platforms. These are used when you need to manage and maintain a large number of DrayTek devices. The first one we'll look at is VigorACS. ACS stands for Automatic Configuration Server. VigorACS 3 is the latest version of DrayTek's network management system and is also the core of the DrayTek SD-WAN solution, allowing it to perform some application optimization and monitoring. New features include SD-WAN, VoIP MOS and SLA, application visibility and SD-WAN policy, and client management with captive portal. TR069 is the protocol that allows the magic to happen, allowing configuration, monitoring and managing DrayTek devices remotely from the comfort of your office or home. You can have any number of DrayTek devices on the internet that can be managed by ACS3, and licensing is available from 25 nodes. It has a user-friendly interface and a responsive display which automatically adjusts and arranges content to suit a variety of devices, including PCs, tablets and phones. It allows automating and scheduling regular maintenance tasks like firmware upgrades and configuration backups, or running real-time reports from 6 different types of reports. So you can always see what's happening in the networks that you manage and can make configuration changes without having to go on site. TRO69 is an application layer protocol for remote management of end-user devices. It was developed for automatic configuration of modems, routers, gateways, access points and so on by using an auto configuration server, ACS. Bear in mind that this communication isn't constantly on. The CPE, that's the router or other Vigor device, establishes the connection with the auto configuration server only at specific points in time determined by the periodic inform interval. It usually lasts several seconds, exchanging all necessary messages between the CPE and the server. This short exchange of messages is called a provisioning session. You can reduce the periodic inform interval if you don't want to wait as long for a provisioning session to update the changes. However, this may place additional load on the server, so we recommend only doing that for testing purposes. Once logged into ACS3, you'll be presented with the dashboard page. This gives you a listing of all your sites and devices, as well as a map showing their locations. From there, you can check on each network and make changes as needed. We won't go into more detail than that for now, but if you're interested, more information is available in a number of videos listed here covering several topics. If you wish to try VigorACS 3, there's a 30-day trial available. If you're located in Australia, you can send an email to sales@draytek.com.au so a trial account can be set up for you. The other software-based management solution that DrayTek have available is VigorConnect. This one is free and can be downloaded from our website. It has many similar features to VigorACS 3, but it's only available for APs and switches on a local network. It can manage up to 100 DrayTek access points or switches, but they must be on the same LAN. So it's suitable for businesses with multiple DrayTek APs and switches located within a building on the same local area network who don't require the advanced functionality of VigorACS 3. As with VigorACS, VigorConnect also utilises the TRO69 standard for communication between the VigorConnect server and the CPE devices. VigorConnect includes device discovery, which automatically discovers DrayTek Vigor access points on the local area network and can auto-configure the TRO69 settings. You basically set everything up in VigorConnect and it pushes the configuration to the APs, which is much quicker and easier than configuring each device one by one. However, for this to happen, the access points will need to be at their factory default settings when installed in the network. Dashboard View provides comprehensive details of device status, such as AP online/offline status, SSIDs, channels, and clients. The monitoring feature will notify you when an access point loses connectivity or when rogue access points are nearby. You can also see CPU and memory usage. If you're interested in VigorConnect, more information is available in a previous webinar we ran some time ago, as well as a video covering how to install and use the software. Links below. Okay, so to summarise, we started by looking at some background information. Here we looked at how to log into the router and some of the web GUI features. This is followed by a deep dive of the system maintenance menu, where we went through some of the configuration options and how to use them. Then we looked at the different ways to upgrade router firmware. And finally, we looked at a couple of software-based management platforms which provide lots of maintenance tasks for larger networks. Okay, that's all for now, but please stay tuned. If you have any questions, we'll be available in the live chat on the right of your screen for the next 5 minutes. For more information about DrayTek products, please check out our website at www.draytek.com.au or send us an email to sales@draytek.com.au or give us a call on 02 9838 8899. Please like and subscribe below, and if you'd like a notification anytime we put up a new video, please select all from the subscribe drop-down menu as well. Thanks and bye for now.